All right, let's talk about something that's, well, a real puzzle. You've got this scenario where a country's economy is just soaring, right? The numbers look fantastic, charts are pointing straight up. But at the same time, for millions of people actually living there, life isn't getting any better. It's a huge contradiction, and it's often called the African Paradox. It's this story of where economic growth and, actual human development just don't seem to line up. So let's dig into why that is.
And this really gets right to the core of it, doesn't it? It's this massive puzzle that has stumped economists and policymakers for decades. I mean, how on earth can a nation's wealth be growing while the actual well-being of its people is just stuck? Or, in some cases, even getting worse? That's the central mystery we're going to try and solve today.
Okay, so look at this. It lays out the paradox in really stark terms. On the one hand, you've got all the signs of what looks like economic success, right? National income is on the rise, foreign investment is flowing in, things look good. But then you look at the other side of the ledger, and what do you see? The human reality. Widespread poverty that just won't go away, and inequality that's actually getting worse. It's like the economic engine is humming along, but the benefits just aren't trickling down to lift everyone up.
So, let's be super clear about something. When we use the word development, we're not just talking about money or GDP figures. No way. We're talking about something so much bigger. It's about human well-being. It's about whether you can see a doctor when you're sick, whether your kids can get a good education. It's about living in a stable society, having your dignity respected, and having a real, genuine shot at building a better life. That's what's truly at stake here.
So, to really get why this gap between growth and development even exists, we've got to go back, way back. The roots of this paradox weren't planted last year, or even in the last decade. We're talking about a story that goes back centuries.
Okay, this is absolutely crucial to understand. What we're looking at here is basically the colonial economic blueprint. And you have to realize, these economies were never designed to be self-sufficient or to benefit the people living there. Nope, they were designed for one thing and one thing only: extraction. The whole system was geared to get raw materials out of the country. And because of that, very little real industrial base or local wealth was ever built up. I mean, even the infrastructure, the roads, the railways, they weren't built to connect people and markets inside the country. They were built to get resources from the mine or the plantation to the port and then onto a ship.
And here's the bottom line, the really key takeaway from all that. This wasn't some kind of equal partnership. From the very beginning, these colonies were plugged into the global economy on fundamentally unequal terms. It locked them into a position of weakness, creating this deep, lasting pattern of dependency. It was a structural crack in the foundation that was going to stick around long, long after the colonial flags came down.
Now, all of this brings us to a really critical idea in economics, called dependency theory. And here's a good way to think about it. The theory basically argues that the modern global economy was built like a pyramid. For the nations at the very top to become wealthy and developed, they needed a huge base of other nations at the bottom to provide cheap resources and labor. This dynamic didn't just happen by accident. It actively kept that base in a state of underdevelopment. And once you're locked into that system, man, it is incredibly difficult to break out.
And this quote, it just hits the nail on the head. Underdevelopment is structural, not accidental. What that means, according to this theory, is that the persistent challenges we see today aren't just a string of bad luck or bad decisions. They are the predictable outcome of a global system, a structure that was intentionally built over centuries.
Okay, so with all that historical context in mind, let's fast forward to a really pivotal moment in the late 20th century. Many newly independent African nations are facing serious economic crises, and the international community steps in, offering a solution. But, and this is a big but, as we're about to see, for a lot of people, the proposed cure ended up feeling just as bad, if not worse, than the disease.
So yeah, with their backs against the wall economically, many African nations turned to the big global financial institutions, the World Bank and the IMF, for help. The solution they came up with was this big package of pretty drastic economic reforms. They were called Structural Adjustment Programs, or SAPs for short.
And here, you can really see the harsh trade-off, the two sides of this coin. Did the SAPs work? Well, on paper, yeah, in some ways. They did manage to get inflation under control and stabilize national budgets. But, and here's the other side, these adjustments came at a just staggering human cost. We're talking deep, painful cuts to things like healthcare and education. Social safety nets were completely shredded. And as poverty got worse, social unrest started to bubble up. It was basically economic shock therapy, and the ones who felt the shock the most were the most vulnerable people in society. So here's the kicker. The really crucial point is that while these programs might have fixed the numbers on a balance sheet, they absolutely fractured the social fabric of these countries. They tried to stabilize the economy from the top down, but they did it at the direct expense of the very people that development is supposed to be for. And what did that do? It just made the whole paradox we've been talking about even deeper.
Well, after the pretty clear failures of these purely economic top-down models, it forced a major rethink. The world started to realize, hey, wait a minute, you can't build a strong house on a crumbling foundation. It became obvious that a whole new playbook was needed.
And this captures that evolution in thinking perfectly. You can see the shift, right? The old way was super simple. Just focus on the markets, let them do their thing. But the new way, the new playbook, is so much smarter. It gets that markets don't just exist in a vacuum. To work properly for everyone, they need a solid foundation of strong, fair institutions. And this is the big one. It recognizes that the growth they create has to be inclusive. It has to actually reach people and improve their lives.
So what does that look like today? Well, the strategies are much more holistic. They look at the whole picture. They focus directly on things like human well-being and concrete plans for reducing poverty. There's a huge emphasis now on good governance, on having a justice system that actually works, the rule of law. And really importantly, there's a push for regional cooperation through groups like the African Union, this idea of building strength together, from within.
Okay, so after this whole journey, we've looked at history, at policy, at big economic theories. Where does that leave us? What have we actually learned? How do we finally crack the code on this paradox we started with?
Well, it turns out the answer might be that for a long time, we were just looking in the wrong place. Focusing only on economic growth, on GDP, is kind of like trying to figure out if someone's healthy by only measuring how tall they are. I mean, it's a piece of information, sure, but it's not even close to the whole story, is it?
So, when you boil it all down, this is what it really comes to. The real roadblocks to development aren't necessarily a lack of economic growth. The real problems are these deep, structural issues that stop that growth from ever reaching the average person. Things like the long shadow of that colonial history, the incredibly difficult job of building strong and fair state institutions from the ground up, and the constant challenge of trying to compete in a global system that's still pretty unequal.
So we end on this final, really important question. If just growing the economy isn't the ultimate goal, then what is? I think the story of this paradox teaches us a powerful lesson, that what truly builds a nation, what really matters in the end, is opportunity. Its justice, its health, and its dignity for every single one of its citizens. That, right there, is the real measure of success.